Hello everyone, my name is Chris DeVries and today I'm going to be talking about U.S. Air Force safety reporting. In overview, I'm going to be covering over the largest accident in aviation history, talk about Air Canada 759, why we should report hazards and errors, some statistics about those reports, benefits to it, and then drawbacks. Ways we can report in the Air Force, it's going to be the ASAP program, and then what it is not, and then finish off with a conclusion. So, what is the largest accident in aviation history? It's going to be the Tenerife disaster. 583 passengers died when two 747s collided on the island of Tenerife. So what about an incident, though, with almost 2 times as many people on board? Why isn't this one talked about? And that's going to be Air Canada 759. Air Canada 759 with almost double the amount of passengers of that 1,083. It isn't as well known because it wasn't an actual accident. According to cockpit data and the National Transportation Safety Board, or the NTSB, analysis, it was about 5 seconds away from a crash. So basically what happened is Air Canada 759 was a near miss by just about 20 feet. The crew had arrived to land on runway 28 right, since 28 left was NOTAM closed, and they had basically a white lighted X, which basically closes the runway for visual approaches. It was placed on runway 28 left. The crew was cleared to land runway 28 right, and it was a clear evening that night, so the pilots decided to fly the approach visually and they didn't back it up with any sort of instrument approach, which is not a requirement for the FAA or for Air Canada at the time, but most airlines do require it. As they commenced the approach, they veered off right and lined up with the taxiway to the right of 28 right. The pilot queried that they were still cleared for the runway, even though the lighting didn't look quite right to them. And then a pilot on the taxiway actually called out that they were lined up with a taxiway, and that's when Tower made the call to go around. Air Canada missed hitting PAL 115, which is Philippines Airlines, by about 20 feet. Had the pilot of Air Canada delayed going around by 5 more seconds, he would have collided. You can see here in the picture, the top image is Air Canada basically lined up with Philippines Airlines at about 100 feet. And then she's there about 60 feet off the ground. That's 20 feet of clearance on the bottom one when he actually went around. So had the pilot on the taxiway not made the call to go around, and had Tower not made the additional call, they very well could have actually run into each other. This image is basically what the NTSB renderings of what they think the pilots saw that night. It's a depiction of the runway and taxiway lighting the pilots would have most likely seen that evening. According to the NTSB, there were additional lights flashing on the taxiway as crews were trying to signal that they were on the taxiway. Basically, pilots on the ground were actually turning on their landing lights, trying to signal like, hey, you're lined up with the taxiway. As you can tell, though, visually, you've got very different lighting here of the runway versus the green lighting. But since they were taking over visual, a little baby Special D, they weren't entirely sure what they were lined with. That's why he queried, and then as they got closer, obviously they have to go around call. This is an additional snip from the NTSB report. It shows the aircraft on the taxiway at the time of the incident. Air Canada would have collided with PAL 115 and then continued down the taxiway, obviously because they're going pretty fast, colliding with the additional 3 aircraft on the taxiway. Had all 3 of these aircraft been full, that would have been 1,083 people that could have been killed. So you can see here, the center there is Air Canada, and then PAL being below them, and then they probably would have continued down, hit UAL 863 and 1118. So this breakdown basically shows how many aircraft fully loaded would have lost and how many passengers they would have lost. So as we kind of already talked about, you got Air Canada with 146 passengers, United Airlines 252, then 254 for Philippine Airlines, and then 179 on the last United Airlines flight. Like I've already said, if every aircraft was actually full, that would have been 1,083, almost double Tenerife's. Air Canada came within 20 feet during the go-around of Philippine Airlines, and like I'd said, if they'd waited 5 more additional seconds, they for sure would have collided with Philippine Airlines on the ground. So you may be asking yourself, alright, the aircraft almost collided, but didn't. So what? So we should be reporting hazards and errors because things like this, obviously this is a much bigger deal because of the potential for loss of life. So the NTSB actually did a investigation, which they normally don't do unless it's an actual accident, But it's important to, we want to make sure that this doesn't happen again, or worse, actually become an accident. So this is basically, why do we report hazards and errors? We want to avoid injuries to others, as well as our equipment and being damaged. Big thing too, it contributes to a just culture and better working climate. Basically what that means is, if people feel comfortable to, admit their mistakes and the potential flaws or potential accidents they might cause, people are more forthcoming more often and actually come forward and make the decision to, hey, I was being unsafe. This is why. That'll fix it for later. And that's kind of what the sub-bullet here says, is your willingness to change based on uncovered hazards or vulnerabilities. You're going to learn from those, right? You learn from your mistakes. And then the biggest thing is no fear of adverse action. What that means is, obviously, I'll talk about it a little later, but as long as you're not willingly breaking the rules or the law, mistakes happen, and if you report those mistakes, you can try to correct them for later, as well as they can, recognize what mistakes and what causes those mistakes, and then fix it for the future by detecting those hazards, mitigating them, eliminating them, or avoiding risks. If you look on the right here, this diagram, or this picture, it's basically the Swiss cheese model. You got your, latent failures, organizational influences, unsafe supervision, preconditions for unsafe acts. And these are all latent failures that eventually could lead up to a mishap. And a latent failure is basically an error or a component, piece of equipment, or system which is not yet manifested, but as a result of a hidden flaw. We try to help detect and mitigate these, with a climate, or avoid risks by reporting latent failures. So again, this is kind of why anonymous reporting is very helpful. It's going to help you mitigate those issues. And with the Swiss cheese model, all it takes is just one act to fix it, and hopefully you don't make it to the mishap step. So, organizational influences, unsafe supervision, and then preconditions for unsafe acts. At some point there, during all these latent failures, during preconditions for an unsafe act, if basically someone has recognized, hey, we're going down this rabbit hole and potentially can make a mistake, and right there they say something that could potentially avoid that mishap. So like the picture says, we want to do safety up here before we get to here. So we're trying to, catch those latent failures early so we don't end up, doing a mishap. So some statistics from reporting and some anonymous reporting. In the last 3 years, the aviation safety reporting system received 1.6 million safety reports. Over 31 countries have adopted some form of confidential reporting to help promote safety. And then ASRS has securely processed over 2 million reports in 48-year history, and that's coming from NASA. So quite a bit of safety reports, which has helped obviously gather more data, helps countries build a better database and an understanding of what kind of errors are out there and how can we mitigate those errors. So some benefits of those statistics and safety reporting in general. Companies have shown drastically positive shifts in safety cultures when confidentiality and anonymous reportings are available. Again, the biggest thing with the confidentiality, people feel more comfortable to come forward, like I talked about a couple slides ago. A more just culture, people willing to come forward and say something because they know that there's less chance for repercussions for coming forward and saying, hey, I made a mistake. According to Howell, when safety cultures encourage active safety reporting of all potential safety concerns, especially the minor incidents that managers like to handle informally. So if you're willing to come forward and say, these are smaller issues, but I had these problems, managers and lower level safety can get involved and fix the problem without having to make it a bigger deal, kind of like the Air Canada 759, where you have to have the NTSB stepping in at that point to be like, why did this happen? And then finally, members that recognize the relationship between safety reporting and aviation accidents could help government agencies and safety departments gather better data to prevent future accidents and mishaps. So again, they're building this database. The more information they have, the more they can look at it and use trend data of, we've recognized, X, Y, and Z are very consistent. At these times of the day, this sort of mishap could have happened because of, and then realize, oh, there's a latent failure here. Let's see if we can correct those latent failures. So those are going to be some of your benefits. Some of the drawbacks with anonymous safety reporting and building a big database like this, the amount of data that they have, it takes a considerable amount of time and energy to process and learn from. One of the things that Ray et al. Basically did a report on AI being incorporated to see if they could benefit from basically consolidating all that data a little easier instead of having to use an individual person or a group of people in a safety shop. Basically try to comb through this data It's not proving to be as effective as it could be. However, they're still researching to see, hey, how do we improve this process so that way we can, cut out the human aspect and use a little more machine learning to try and fix some of these errors and these latent failures. Some of the other issues too is going to be misuse of the reporting process, which I'll talk to a little bit later of what these reports are not. People don't have a full understanding of what they're supposed to be reporting and what they shouldn't be reporting because, again, you have to comb through all this data. And then, like I said, the additional human-in-the-loop system is required, costing thousands of man-hours to comb through all this data to try to build an actual database so that we can learn from these mistakes or these potential mistakes. So what are some ways we can report hazards and errors? We have the Aviation Safety Action Program, or ASAP. So for us in the Air Force, we have the ASAP program. It's a little bit older system in the airlines. However, the Air Force is trying to catch up with that process and see, hey, how do we, step into the future and maintain a good safety culture of people feeling comfortable reporting mistakes or latent failures they think they could have caused. So what is ASAP? It's basically a website app that allows you to report hazards and errors. It's available to anyone from aircrew to maintainers or even flight line workers. Basically anyone that's involved or that could recognize and prevent a mishap, they absolutely could file an ASAP report. You can submit known or anonymously. Safety officers will basically investigate, record, and then trend those hazards. And then they disseminate those hazards to the community for awareness. It's basically a great tool to capture data that might have been missed. It allows for basically people to, like we've already talked about, anonymously report. And then it builds that trend data, which is super helpful. Anyone at any time can use these using basically most devices. You can use it on the internet. A quick Google of literally Aviation Safety Action Program, that'll pop up the first thing. People can go to their local safety shop and report it on paper, however they feel most comfortable. But the whole point is they want to gather this data and allow for that anonymous safety reporting to give safety officers the best shot at compiling data and recognizing latent failures early before they become a bigger issue. What ASAP is not, though, it's not duplicative. And what that means, it's basically an additional way to capture and manage hazards that would have been otherwise reported. So a good example would be, it's not a repeat of a maintenance write-up. You're not going to go down. It's an added metric for something that might not have been captured by someone else, or I feel necessary is reported. But it's not I'm just going to keep repeating data because I think my write-up on consistent tire failure is worth adding to the more database. Because again, it goes back to my point of too much data, it takes too long to comb through, and that's already being tracked somewhere else. An additional thing, it's not privileged safety information. So in the U.S. Air Force, privileged information applies to basically members of the Air Force to prevent withholding information during a safety investigation. It encourages free-flowing information quickly to prevent future mishaps. ASAP information isn't privileged, though. It is still confidential and encourages you to report, but it's not going to fall under the guise of safety privilege. Also, it's not another way to report misconduct. It's a safety process that focuses on mishap prevention, not addressing bad or illegal behaviors. So I've already touched on that a little bit earlier. A good example, if you were reporting illegal or blatant disregard for procedures or rules that should be reported via your chain of command or like the inspector general, basically as criminal behavior, these should be reported obviously using those proper chains, because once you report it as an ASAP report, that's not going to protect you from actually breaking the law or blatantly breaking the rules. So that's where you need to go up the right proper chains of command. And then additionally, one thing it's not a place to complain. You don't go in there and basically say, like for example, you had an inconvenience or an issue that delayed you on the ground or caused some problems, but they're not really safety related or not really worthy of a report. It's something that you can handle on your own or handle through different channels. But again, this is too much data. We're trying to comb through that data, right, to build a better database. So if it's somewhere where you're just going to go to complain, that's just one more report that someone has to go through and say that this isn't, safety related, and you're just wasting time and you're hurting this process to try to prevent latent failures and avoid mishaps and accidents. So in conclusion, safety reporting is super important. It allows companies and nations to gather data quickly to prevent future mishaps. A considerable amount of data is difficult to comb through, so it's important to report make any report properly in a timely manner. Kind of like we already talked about those 4 different things what ASAP reporting is not. And then your voice is heard. Your safety report, even when you feel at fault, as long as you're not breaking the law or acting malicious or blatantly breaking those rules on purpose, as long as this was a mistake or an accident, you are protected for the reasons of preventing mistakes. And again, that just culture, we're trying to foster a safety culture of I'm willing to accept my mistake. I want to prevent mistakes from other people, or from other people doing those same mistakes later. And then statistically, it has shown that there are safety benefits in the aviation community by this type of reporting. So it's important to remember and understand that you are protected by doing this, and you're preventing future mishaps. So it's a good thing to use these ASAP reports, feel comfortable to say, hey, I made a mistake. This is what I did, and then that database or that future correction can be applied to all, not just you, preventing those mistakes and preventing those mishaps. So in overview, this is what we covered today. We talked about the largest aircraft accident in history, the potentially largest, even larger aircraft accident of Air Canada 759, and basically the lessons learned from those reports, and then why we report those errors and hazards, some statistics, and then benefits and drawbacks of these kinds of reports, ways we can report in the U.S. Air Force with the ASAP program, and then what it basically is not, and then kind of touched on just like the benefits of this program and why it's important that we are reporting safety hazards. These are some of my references. If you have any questions, I recommend you the class chat. Otherwise, you have a great day, and God bless.